All right, hello everybody. Thank you so much for being here. It's so exciting to have a full room. Everybody loves a free lunch, right? I'm Zap, if you don't know who I am, ZAP, Program Manager here at the EC. I'm so excited to be hosting this book launch for longtime EC Advisor, now author, Kris Kelso. Let's just give him a big round of applause, just to be like, so today's a little bit funky because we have a virtual audience as well as an in-person audience. So I just ask that, please, if you kind of leave the room for our in-person audience, don't use that sliding door in the back. It's very loud. Use one of these other doors, and of course, wear your mask whenever you get up. For our virtual audience, please feel free to type things into the chat. I will be moderating the chat throughout this time, and then whenever we open up, you can also unmute yourself to ask questions when you're called upon. And the whole in-person audience will be able to hear the virtual audience, and the virtual audience will be able to hear the in-person audience. So that's how today is going to work. Also, for our in-person audience, we hopefully have books for almost everyone in the room. And for our virtual audience, if you stick with us till the very end, we'll be raffling off 5 books. So please add your name, or make sure your name is on your Zoom account. If not, I'll be messaging you during this. But we'll spin a little wheel and pick 5 people to receive a free book from Kris. How does that sound? Any other questions before we get started? Okay, awesome. Anyways, I just missed applause, right? So excited to have you here, so excited to have Kris. Thank you so much, everyone. I'll hand things over to Kris, but let's give him a warm welcome.
Thanks, everybody. I'm so glad to be here and so glad to be in a real room with real people again after so long. I've done a ton of virtual events, and there's just nothing like being physically present. So even though we're distanced, I'm glad you guys are all here. Very thankful for everybody as well that's online and joining us virtually. I know some couldn't make it, some still need to quarantine, and that's totally fine. So thanks everybody for joining. I want to mention real quick, Zap mentioned we're going to give away some books. The books were bought and sponsored by Pinnacle Bank, so I want to make sure to say thank you to Pinnacle because they bought a case of books for this event and said, here, give these to EC members and people that show up for the event. So thank you very much, Pinnacle Bank. I have been an entrepreneur for more than half of my career at this point. And in that time, I have founded multiple companies, I've led turnaround efforts, I have advised investors, and I've even taught classes on entrepreneurship, both here at the EC as well as at some of our local universities. And it's been a great ride. Those of you that are entrepreneurs know the roller coaster of entrepreneurship. But there's one little detail that often gets left out of my story, and that is that most of the time I felt completely unqualified to do whatever I was doing. I was very often just figuring it out as I went along. I remember starting my first company when I was 31 years old, and I went to a bookstore here in town and bought a stack of books on everything that I thought I needed to know to run a company. See, a key detail is I started my first business with no business training whatsoever. I don't even have a college degree. So I went in totally cold and just said, I'm going to figure this thing out. And I bought a stack of books on things like how to write a contract, how small business finances, sales, marketing, scoping a consulting engagement. And I just read those books and I started getting to work. And those first few years, almost everything that I did, I was doing for the first time. And I was learning so many amazing things, landing clients, managing big projects. It was all a learning experience for me. And whatever I needed to know, I just figured out a way to learn it, often in real time as I was doing things. And I love to learn. So it was immensely gratifying. It was a great experience. But every now and then, somebody would refer to me as an expert in something. And I would feel a twinge of guilt. Like maybe I had unintentionally deceived them, or maybe they thought more of me than was really there. And even though there was plenty of evidence that I was successful, sometimes in my mind, I was a fraud. And then one day in my learning, I learned about Impostor Syndrome. How many are familiar with Impostor Syndrome? Okay, a few people haven't heard of it. So imposter syndrome is a psychological term that was coined in the 1970s, and it refers to the tendency of many people, it turns out, to overvalue other people's accomplishments and undervalue or even doubt the reality of their own success. And when you have imposter syndrome, you'll look at other people, other entrepreneurs perhaps, and you'll say, well, they're successful because of they're smart and savvy, and they have made all the right moves, and they really seem to know what they're doing. And boy, my success has involved a lot of luck and timing, and maybe it's because I just happen to know the right people. I'll give you an example. When I started my first company, my very first client was a man who used to be my boss. In fact, it was almost 3 years until I landed a client that wasn't the result of some relationship from my past. Now, you would think that I would see that as a strength, because it meant that people who had worked with me before wanted to continue to do business with me again and again. But I often saw it as a weakness, because I wasn't winning clients the way I thought it was supposed to be done, with a formalized sales process. So the underlying fear for people who struggle with imposter syndrome is that sooner or later, someone, or maybe everyone, is going to figure out that you really don't know what you're doing, that you're just making it up as you go, that you're figuring it out on the fly, and that you really aren't who they think you are. And that if that happens, it's all going to come crumbling down around you. I used to imagine that one day I would be sitting in a room full of very educated business people, and someone would bring up some model or principle that was taught on the very first day of business school. And he'd say something like, well, of course we can't do that because of the Thompson principle. Kris, you know the Thompson principle, right? And then the entire room would turn and look at me, waiting for me to give some commentary on the Thompson principle. And as beads of sweat would start to form on the back of my neck, I would stammer around for a few minutes and try to say something halfway intelligent until eventually it became clear to everybody that I had no idea what the Thompson principle was. And at that point, some men in dark suits and sunglasses would come in and say, sir, I'm afraid you're going to have to come with us. And by the way, if you're sitting there wondering, or those of you on the live stream are wondering if you should know what the Thompson principle is, don't worry about it. I just made that up. There is no Thompson principle, okay? But that fear, that thought you may have just had of maybe there's something I should know that I don't know, that's exactly what I'm talking about. So of course that never actually happened to me, but for years, I had this nagging voice in the back of my head that would try to tell me that my success was all just an illusion, that it wasn't real. It would say things like, you're not really a business owner, you're just a guy doing some consulting. You don't really know what you're doing, you just know how to sound like you know what you're doing. You would never have landed that first gig if not for your old boss giving you a chance. Sometimes it would say, you're the only one that doesn't deserve to be here in this room or at this table. And I never really talked to very many people about these thoughts. I didn't have a lot of people that I felt like I could talk to. You know, most people that I knew professionally were either someone I was trying to impress or someone who seemed to be impressed by me, and I didn't want to disappoint any of them. So I just kept it to myself. But I felt very alone with those doubts, those thoughts, very isolated. That voice happens in a lot of people's heads. Maybe you felt that way at some point in your career. In fact, studies show that up to 70% of the population experiences imposter syndrome at some point in their career. And it tends to be more prevalent among high achievers. So the more you're pushing the boundaries, the more you're stretching yourself, the more you're trying to achieve greatness, trying to do things that have never been done before, the more likely you are to find yourself in situations where you feel in over your head and you think, maybe I'm not qualified, or maybe I'm not what everyone seems to think that I am. Even though it's a very common feeling, it's not the same for everybody. See, that voice of doubt in your head will craft a very specific message about your story. See, that voice in your head knows your particular weaknesses, your particular insecurities. Maybe education is not an issue for you like it was for me for a period. But maybe there's some other weakness that you see, some other flaw that you see in your life that you think holds you back. Perhaps you're not a very eloquent speaker. You don't like getting in front of crowds. Doing something like this scares you, and you think that makes you feel inferior. Or maybe on the other hand, you're a great speaker. You have a lot of charisma, and maybe you secretly think you've gotten by more on charisma than hard work. Maybe you're not very well connected. Networking and trying to meet people is not something you're naturally good at, and you think that holds you back. Or on the other hand, maybe you make relationships really easily, and you think you've gotten by more on relationships than your own merit. The point is, it's not just one set of problems that people with imposter syndrome deal with. It's unique to your situation. It's very personalized. As my business grew and I continued to have success, that voice would change tactics. It would say things like, your business isn't a real business until you have a physical office. Your business isn't a real business until you have employees. Your business isn't a real business until you get to $1 million in revenue. Your business isn't a real business until you have a full management team in place. And so no matter what I achieved, no matter what milestone I hit, that voice would come up with some other flaw, some other reason that maybe I wasn't what I thought I was or what other people thought I was. So that voice has been called many things by different people. It's been called the self-doubt, the inner critic, the voice of the saboteur. It's one of my favorite ones. But I started simply referring to that voice as the imposter. And I do that not because the voice is trying to convince me that I'm an imposter, but really to remind me that that voice itself isn't real. That voice is the imposter. Now I've seen so many entrepreneurs battle the imposter at different times. See, entrepreneurs by nature are risk takers. They have the ability and the willingness to step out and try something new. And that often puts us in uncharted territory, where we're doing things for the first time, where we're having to figure it out on the fly. A CEO named Toby Thomas used an illustration that has become my go-to description of entrepreneurship. He said that an entrepreneur is like a man riding on a lion. Everyone around him is saying, whoa, look at that guy, that's amazing, he's so brave, I wish I had the guts to do what he's doing. And all the while, the man on the lion is saying, how in the world did I get on a lion? And how do I keep from being eaten by it? Right? And that contrast, that difference in perspective is remarkably accurate. I cannot tell you the number of times that I've been given accolades and admiration and awards and verbal high fives for the risks that I've taken and the things I've accomplished as an entrepreneur. And yet on the inside, I wasn't always celebrating along with them. Sometimes I was freaking out a little bit because what looks to others like strength and resolve and boldness felt to me like a series of near catastrophes. So what you see on the outside can often be very different from what's going on the inside and behind the scenes. Several years ago, I was sitting in a hotel lobby waiting for the start of a conference that I had flown in to attend. And I couldn't help but overhear the conversation between two men that were sitting nearby. One of them was obviously a businessman, and he was several years, maybe even a couple of decades older than I was at the time. And I heard him say some things like, I'm really trying to slow down. I'm trying to reconnect with my family. I've flown all over the world. I've done these huge business deals. I've made millions of dollars, but my marriage is strained. And I barely have a relationship with my kids. And as I sat there hearing this conversation, I thought, what do I have to do to make sure that I never, ever say that? See, my family is really, really important to me. And I don't want to achieve professional success at the expense of my family relationships. And so as I thought about that conversation, I had two realizations that morning. The first one is that all success comes at a cost. Success requires sacrifice. And it's really, really important to recognize that and to be intentional about the things that you're going to say no to, because every yes requires a dozen or more no's. And that's different for everybody. We all have our own sets of values and priorities. But the second realization that I had was that I usually have no idea what another person has chosen to sacrifice in pursuit of their success. If I had compared myself to that businessman without knowing that part of his story, I might have felt like a failure. I might have felt like I couldn't measure up, like I wasn't capable because I couldn't achieve what he had achieved while maintaining my own personal values and priorities. And I don't tell that story to try to deride anybody else's success. And I'm not trying to give you a lesson on making the right choices. I tell that story to point out that there's no value in comparing the reality of your own life to a highly polished and filtered version of somebody else's life. It's not real. It's a trap. Now, I've seen so many successful people fall into the comparison trap. I know one entrepreneur who doesn't feel like a real CEO because she started her business from scratch and she just gave herself that title. Now, she's running a multi-million-dollar company with great profit margins, and she's raising up leaders to run the business day to day so that it runs without her, but she still doesn't quite feel legitimate because she just gave herself that title. She didn't earn it from anyone. Just down the road, I know another business owner who doesn't feel like a real entrepreneur because he didn't start his business from scratch. He bought it from the previous owner. Now, this guy has totally revamped the business model, and he's taken a stagnant company and got it growing profitably again. But he doesn't feel legitimate because he didn't do it the way he's seen other people do it. So when we buy into these lies, these false narratives that mostly live only in our heads, these false truths about our success and our value, what happens is we let the imposter take those things about our story that we should be celebrating, the things we should be proud of because they make us unique and they give us a flavor and a texture to our story that no one else's has. And we let the imposter weaponize those things against us and steal our joy. President Teddy Roosevelt said, "Comparison is the thief of joy." You can feel great about yourself until you compare yourself to someone else, and suddenly that's gone. So as I began to learn about imposter syndrome a few years ago, I started studying it. First of all, I realized what kind of impact it had had on my career. And then I began to see it in other people playing out. And I started talking to entrepreneurs about it here at the EC, some of my clients. And then I began to speak about it at conferences and events. And the more I would talk about it, the more I realized how prevalent it is among high achievers, among people that are pushing the boundaries. The people that are doing great things feel inferior, but many of them won't talk about it because they think they're the only ones. They think it's just me. Part of what imposter syndrome does is it tries to convince you to not be honest and vulnerable because you're at risk of opening yourself up. And yet by not being honest about those feelings, you perpetuate the feeling in someone else that they're the only one. And so I started looking for a book about imposter syndrome specifically for entrepreneurs. I'm a person that recommends a lot of books. When you talk to any of my clients or some of the entrepreneurs I met with, I'm always saying there's a book on that. There's that idea is covered here. This is a great one. You need to study this. And I read a ton of books. So I looked for a book that would help entrepreneurs with this particular problem. And though a lot has been written about entrepreneurs or about imposter syndrome, not a lot has been written specifically for entrepreneurs. There's a bunch of reasons for that I won't go into right now, but eventually I decided this book had to be written. And so in 2020, some of us had some free time. I had a little bit of time, and I decided to write a book. I was very fortunate to work with a publishing company that was born right here at the Entrepreneur Center, Dexterity Books. Matt West, who couldn't be here today, but I believe is on the live stream. I saw his name on there, founded that company, and he has assembled a great team. They're doing amazing things. And they're now a multi-million-dollar publishing house, birthed right here at the EC. And when I sat down with Matt, in fact, I think it was Jeremy from the EC who introduced me to Matt several years ago. And when I sat down and we started to talk about this idea, he just really got it. He totally understood, and he really bought in. And so Matt helped me assemble a great team. I had an incredible writing coach named Matt Litton, who coached me through the process. I'm a big believer in coaching. Anything you want to do really, really well, you should hire someone who does it well and has that experience to help you, someone with coaching skills. And Matt guided me through the process of writing this book over the last year. And I'm really, really pleased with the results. And I can't wait to hear what you guys think of it, those of you that haven't read it yet. So we're going to transition now to some Q&A. Those of you in the room or those online can either text messages. Haley's going to watch for those, or she may even invite some people to unmute and speak and ask some questions. I'm willing to talk about imposter syndrome itself, the book and the book writing process, whatever you guys want to go. I want to open this up to the floor to share with you this journey and what this book is all about.
Awesome. Well, let's see if someone is our virtual audience who wants to go first, or our in-person audience.
We got one in the back corner.
Chandler.
Yeah, so speaking specifically to my imposter syndrome with respect to long form writing, had you had any experience writing anything long form, or had you kept a blog or anything like that before you started writing a book?
That's a great question.
Let me just repeat that. Do you want to repeat that for now?
I'll repeat it. He asked about, he said he has imposter syndrome about long form writing, about writing a book, and asked if I did. Absolutely, I did. In fact, I wrote in the book about my struggle with imposter syndrome, about writing a book about imposter syndrome. Can we get any more meta than that? I have written some things. I've written some articles and short form pieces. I thought that a book was probably beyond me. And many people have told me, Kris, you need to write a book. You need to write a book. And first of all, I didn't want to just write a book for the sake of writing a book. I wanted to really have something to say. And as I mentioned, this book I felt compelled to write. It wasn't just, oh, what do I want to write on? Let's pick a topic. I really felt this one needed to be written. But I went and got some help to make sure that I was going about it in a professional way, in a way that was going to be successful. If I had just tried to write it on my own, it wouldn't have been nearly as good as it turned out to be. And that's not to say that it couldn't be better, but I got a lot of help with that. But yes, I struggled with, can I be the writer? Is this an idea that I should give to someone else and have them write? Ultimately, through some of that coaching and working with some people, I believed that I really could take it on as long as I brought the right team around me to execute it well. And I wanted to execute it with a level of quality that I probably wouldn't have gotten on my own. So I needed some help. And that's one of those things about imposter syndrome. My message is not to tell you that you can be everything that you want to be and do anything you want to do, and that, we're all awesome and everybody's amazing and don't have any doubt. Sometimes there's just stuff you're not equipped to do. But more than likely, you can go get equipped if you believe enough to put in the work and to get the help and do the things that you want to do. So I struggled with that. And even the fact that I experienced imposter syndrome while preparing this book made me think, well, maybe I'm not qualified to write a book about imposter syndrome because I'm not over it. But as I wrote in the book, it's not something that you get over permanently and just say, well, that was a chapter in my life and I'm done with that. It's more of a battle that you fight and something you learn to manage and harness that energy, harness those feelings, and use them for your benefit rather than letting them hold you back.
Awesome. I don't have anything from our virtual, Mike Atlas. Mike, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Sure. Hey, Chris.
Hey, Mike.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Where do you draw the psychological line between imposter syndrome and just kind of low self-confidence in your professional abilities? And I'm just asking for a friend.
The old asking for a friend question. One of the things that I learned from an executive coach that I work with, his name is Roger Hall, is the difference between self-esteem and self-efficacy. Self-esteem is largely emotional. It's how you feel about yourself. And I got a newsflash for you. Feelings are fickle. Feelings are easily manipulated. They're not reliable. You cannot live your life by your feelings. So how you feel about yourself should not be the question, or the way that you make decisions or determine whether you can or can't do something. On the other hand, self-efficacy is a fact-based look at your history, at the things you have done, and an honest assessment of what your capabilities are. And a key component of that is particularly important for entrepreneurs and people that are always doing new things. Everything you go to do for the first time is going to be preceded by a lack of experience, by definition, right? So you don't have to have experience or a track record doing that thing. You need to look back at all the other things you have taken on and accomplished, and the places you have maybe failed and learned and grown through that process, or succeeded. And so this conversation that I had with my coach came at a particularly difficult time in my entrepreneurial career with my first business, when I needed to make a pivot, I needed to shift, and I wasn't sure if I could do it. And what he helped me realize was that I had pivoted my life and career many, many times. And even though this new thing I was going to do, I didn't have a lot of experience in, I had shown myself that I can take on new things and figure them out. I essentially learned that figuring something out on the fly, which I saw as a weakness because it meant I wasn't prepared, that's actually a really valuable skill. To be able to dive into something and learn it as you go is useful in so many situations. So Mike, to get back specifically to your question, I think you have to be able to take an honest look at the facts of your history, and don't discount the failures where you learn. The value of those failures sometimes is far greater than the successes where everything just went great and we didn't really learn anything.
Next question. All right. I have another one. I'm going to take one virtually. Dave, would you like to unmute yourself?
Sure. Hey, Chris. Dave Castro. Hey, another question. Hey, man. What was the thing that surprised you the most about the book writing process? I mean, you've done a ton. You've been very successful, and Just curious, anything in that process that surprised you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think maybe a thing that surprised me was I set out for myself kind of a schedule for writing, and I thought I was going to go at a slow pace, and this is my first book and I'm not a writer, it's going to take me a while. And so I set myself a schedule and said, here's what I think I'm going to do. And I presented that to my writing coach, and he said, Kris, that's exactly what professional writers do. He said, I set a goal to write 2,000 words a week for 20 weeks. It didn't end up happening just exactly like that, but that was sort of the goal. He said, man, 2,000 words a week is solid. And I was thinking, oh, to be a professional writer, you got to be able to write for 8 hours a day straight and bang out, pages and pages and pages. And this professional writer who's written multiple bestsellers and sold millions of books that he's written said, no, man, that's how you get it done. It's in small pieces. And so, I didn't think that I was a book writer, because I've heard stories of authors who they go to their writing shed or they go to their thing and they shut everything out and they just bang it out for 8 hours straight. And they write a book in 2 weeks. And I'm here to tell you, I am not that guy. I can't do that. I can't stay focused for that long, and I have to take a break. I have to give my mind some time to marinate on ideas. But it turns out a lot more people do it the way I did it than I realized. So that was both encouraging and a little surprising.
Awesome. How about our in-person audience? We have another question in person. Alex in the back.
Could you speak to any research that you know on imposter syndrome and like a diversity phrase, so whether statistics show that, for example, like women might be more prone to imposter syndrome versus men, or
Yes.
minorities people, or things like that, how that affects the imposter syndrome?
Yes, I'm glad you asked that question. The question was, can I speak to statistically how imposter syndrome affects men versus women and different races, and speak to the diversity. When imposter syndrome was first sort of discovered and coined by psychologists in the 1970s, it was thought to only affect women. And it was sort of all the research that was done was around women in corporate America, kind of the woman in a man's world, trying to ascend the ranks in the battles that they fought. And for that reason, much of what has been written about imposter syndrome has been focused to women. I saw a lot of books by women written to women. But further research has shown that it affects men and women equally. There's no difference. Now, women are often a little more willing to talk about it and be honest about it than the guys are. But statistically, there's not a difference between men and women. And similar stats for racial diversity, it transcends cultures and race, and people experience it for different reasons. So some people may have imposter syndrome because they are a minority in a situation where they all feel very alone and isolated, or they feel like people don't respect them. That may be the reason that they have it, but them being a minority doesn't make them more prone to imposter syndrome. It affects us each in our own way. And in fact, in the same way that someone who is a minority in their situation may feel that, someone else who is in the majority, who's middle-class white male, might feel imposter syndrome because they feel like, man, I've just gotten by because things are easier for me, and I don't deserve the success that I've had. And that's not 100% accurate either. There's always a mix of luck and chance and timing and help from others and all of those things that contribute to our success. When I was writing the book, actually, and in the editing process, I had a lot of different people look at this book to make sure that I wasn't just writing it from a white male perspective. And there's a bunch of stories in the book. So this book is not all about me. I include a lot of my story, but I gathered stories from dozens of other entrepreneurs. I interviewed hundreds of entrepreneurs and gathered a bunch of other stories to tell. And many of the stories, I've changed the name or the details to maintain people's privacy and things like that. So we had the opportunity to then flip the, maybe flip the gender or change a name here or there to make it more diverse of a book. And there were a couple situations where some people actually suggested that I have a couple of stories of high-powered businessmen that are experiencing imposter syndrome, and somebody said, should you make one of those a female? And I said, no, I don't think we should do that, for a very specific reason, because so much of what's been written about imposter syndrome has focused on women. I want to make sure that the women readers know that successful men experience imposter syndrome too. And I thought that I would be doing a disservice to my female readers if I skewed the stories female. And so for the most part, I left them the way they were, male and female and those kind of things. So I wanted people to know that this affects everyone. And it's not just a gender problem or a race problem. Yes?
Why do you think this book hasn't been written originally regarding entrepreneurship?
It's an interesting question, and one obviously that I asked and looked around when I was looking for a resource like this. I think that some of the same reasons that entrepreneurs are susceptible to imposter syndrome, that being that they're put on a pedestal, they're celebrated as superheroes. Secondly, entrepreneurs are so often in sales mode, right? If they're not pitching customers, they're pitching investors, they're pitching potential team members to join their team. So entrepreneurs are always selling their vision, their idea. But entrepreneurs also always know that there's a lot of flaws behind the scenes, right? That the vision that they're pitching is not a reality yet. And they're trying to make it that reality. So entrepreneurs feel that imposter syndrome more acutely, I believe, than a lot of people for those reasons, but that also prevents them from talking about it. So I think, honestly, it just hasn't really been widely discussed how prevalent this is in the entrepreneurial community. And so no one's written a book about it. Now, ask me in a year, and if I've sold 50 books, then it obviously isn't really a big issue, but I've already sold more than that. So I think it's 52, thanks. Yeah, so I can't say why other than nobody's willing to just have that conversation. And that's where I decided, okay, I'm gonna be the one to step out and admit this has happened to me. I know hundreds of other people that it's happened to. It's a real thing, and we need to have an open conversation about it. Dean.
Kris, first of all, congratulations, and I say not just author, but esteemed author.
Thank you.
But could you give just an overview of the book writing process? Because I don't know much about it, but so much seems to have changed. It used to be the old full publishing, and now there's self-publishing. Yes. There's more of a hybrid. You mentioned having a writing coach. There's ghost writing, independent writing. So there's so much out there. If you could just share the whole process and why you just chose your path.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So, the traditional publishing route, or the old way that publishing was done, is you come up with an idea for a book, you write, you develop an outline and maybe a sample chapter, and you sort of put a book proposal to, and you go shop it to publishers. And you're essentially selling your idea to a publisher who's going to buy the idea from you. That's that advance check that you sometimes hear about. Authors get a check to write the book. They're buying the idea from you, you write the book, and then you get a royalty on the books they sell, but the publisher essentially owns that book because they bought it from you. They paid you to write it. Over the last decade or two, there's been this rise of this. Of course, there's self-publishing where you write it yourself and you completely own it, but then it's really completely on you to develop it and do all the things you need to do. And some very successful authors have been able to go that route, sort of like really successful musicians that can just produce their own music and don't need a label because they're so well known. But in the middle is this hybrid publishing model. And so Dexterity is a hybrid publisher. And what that means is that they didn't write a check to me, I wrote a check to them. They are a part of my team to produce this book. I own the book, which I love, that I own the intellectual property. Dexterity gets a cut of the revenue from the book sales, but they're doing a lot of the work. They brought all the expertise. I essentially hired them to help me produce this book. So the process was, and this can be different for a lot of people. People do it differently, but for me, I had the idea for the book. I started talking to Dexterity, decided they were the team to do it because they bought into it. They did some market research and some things up front on the idea to tell me that the idea had some merit, where it would fit in the category, what it physically should look like, size and thickness and word count, and kind of how it would fit in the category that I was trying to reach. So it really helped me frame up, like, this is what I want to produce. And then I began to work with Matt Litton, the writing coach, on the outline. I spent the first 6 weeks or so just developing a detailed outline of the book. And it was a great process because I was able to do a brain dump on Matt of all my ideas, everything that was in my head, all the research I had looked up. I had spent 2 years prior studying this and sort of preparing to write this book. And so I dumped everything on him, and then he and I together built the structure of the book. And when I say we built an outline, I'm talking about a 12-page outline with, here's the chapter, here's the main points, here's the stories I'm going to use, here's the data, here's what I want, the key takeaways to be, and really outlined that book before I started writing anything, really writing. I thought that was a great way to do it because once I had that outline, when I started the writing process, I didn't write it from chapter 1 to chapter 10. I was able to dive in wherever I was inspired, wherever I had good ideas or a story that was, really pertinent. And so I wrote it like a patchwork. I mean, I bounced around. I would spend some time over here and some time over there, and I'd do this chapter for a while and then go work on something else and then come back to it and reframe it. And so it was sort of a mess of, just a bunch of pieces of content until it started to really fill in and we got to the point that we could say, I think chapter 2 is about done, or chapter 3 is ready, but I need one more story here. And Matt was my coach through that process. So he was watching and giving me comments and suggestions and ideas and helping me, particularly when I would tell a story or write a story and it just wasn't strong enough. Like I needed more detail, or more often I can be a little long-winded like I'm doing right now. And I can, over-explain something, and he would say, hey man, you need to tighten this up. It's running a little long. That's not really serving the reader to get into that much detail. So it was a process of me writing, him giving me feedback and comments. And so we sort of edited in line, which is also different than what I've heard from a lot of other authors where they say they wrote it all kind of by themselves and then took it to an editor who started chopping it all up and reorganizing content. And I sort of did that collaboratively with Matt along the way. Then we handed it over to grammatical editing and some of the other editing processes that you have to go through. All in all, it was probably 6 weeks of building the outline and then 4.5 months of writing. And then we edited this book really fast, like a few weeks of editing, graphic design, the cover, the title, all of this kind of stuff to get it to the printer on time for our release date. It was a pretty tight schedule.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Jack?
Yeah.
Would you draw a line in this whole process of overcoming that past imposter that it becomes an overconfidence and possibly would hurt anything?
Good question. So the question is there a point where this becomes, where overcoming the imposter becomes overconfidence, right? I don't typically, well, there's two answers to that question. One is most people have imposter syndrome. The people that don't are usually very narcissistic. And so it's one of those things of if you struggle with it, I actually say that's a good thing because you want a little bit of that all your life. It's going to keep you from becoming overconfident. And one of the things that I talk about in the book is that overcoming the imposter is not you kill it, it dies, it goes away, you never deal with it again. It's you learn how to manage it, how to harness it. I actually teach you how to reframe those feelings of it, of I may be a fraud or an imposter, to an actual sign of good things happening. That one of the things that I realized in looking at my history was the moments that I felt the most insecure were often the pivotal moments in my career where I was about to do something great or open a door, or I was in really good company where something powerful was going to happen. And so I learned to experience those feelings as a sign and actually anticipate, oh, there's something good here. and I need to lean into that. Now that's different from becoming so confident that I say, I can just go jump off a building and nothing's going to harm me because I'm amazing. And that is not what this book is about. So on one hand, I don't think you're gonna struggle with that. If you feel imposter syndrome, then that means you don't have these ridiculous narcissistic tendencies to just believe in yourself that you can do anything at any time. But on the other hand, I think you can actually harness that energy and use it for good. So the goal is not to make it go away. The goal is to turn it from a negative to a positive. Yes?
I would imagine, thank you for being here and answering questions.
You're welcome.
I would imagine that as now an imposter scholar, you probably have a system for dealing with it in different scenarios. Because I'm invaded by this guy in my head all the time.
Yeah.
And I have to deal with it in different ways. If I'm talking to a potential client, I kind of have to feign an expertise in it or whatever,
Yeah.
like this concept or whatever it is. If I'm in a personal conversation, of course, you can be like, I have no idea what that is. Can you tell me your experience? But there's times when it's critical that this knowledge that you don't have be manifest in your presentation. How do you overcome that? Total ignorance versus the sales pitch.
So I'm going to say, as much as possible, you've got to weed that necessity out of your life. Don't put yourself in a position where you feel obligated to fake it, right? Now that may sound like I'm saying don't step into opportunity. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying go into opportunities with what I call humble confidence, meaning I don't have to have the answer because I believe in myself that I can figure out the answer. And when I am asked the question I don't know, I don't have to just say I don't know, and I don't have to just make up an answer that's totally out of thin air. I can say, that's a great question. I don't know that, but I bet we can figure that out. I am totally confident we can figure that out. And turning that, because one of the tools of the imposter, one of the weapons that it uses is your fear of being exposed, right? The fear that somebody's going to figure out that you don't actually know what you're doing. That's the fear that you carry around. Well, the antidote is to actually tell people, I don't know what I'm doing. Because then there's no more weapon. But you don't have to do it in a self-degrading or demoralizing, defeatist way. You can say, here's all the things I've done. This is new territory for me, but let me tell you all the other times that I've taken on new territory and figured it out. And this is just another one of those things that we're going to figure it out. And some of that's tough if you don't have a track record, if you don't feel like you have that history, you do have to build it. But I really, really hate the term fake it till you make it. Because I think there's just an inherent deception in there that is dangerous, and it will feed your imposter syndrome when you are faking it and you know you're faking it. So as much as you can, don't fake it, be honest. But that doesn't mean you have to say, I don't know, I'm an idiot. There's a balance there. And I talk about that in, I think it's chapter 8, I talk about humble confidence and going from proud insecurity where you're faking it on the outside and totally freaked out and scared on the inside, to humble confidence where you say, I'm willing to admit what I do know and what I don't know, but I have the confidence that we can figure these things out and nothing is insurmountable and we'll get there. That's the approach that you have to be able to take.
Any other questions from the virtual audience? I just want to check in again. Okay, just want to check. We got you first.
Congratulations, Chris. Great
Thank
job.
you.
How has the research or writing of the book changed your personal life or business life?
Man, well, so just becoming aware of imposter syndrome is transformational. Many people, when I've just explained it to them for the first time, it's like I can see a weight lifted off their shoulders, right? So, and I experienced that when I started to learn about it as well. But the research, the digging, I've read dozens and dozens of studies and trials and I've gotten into some pretty technical psychological papers and stuff because I really wanted to understand this if I'm going to write a book about it. It's helped me see it from a lot of different angles and really understand the psychology of it. So it's like, I recognize now that it's just a battle that goes on in my head, and I just have to have the right tools to counteract those thoughts. And so now I can often do those very much in real time, right? I walk into a room and there's a bunch of people that are intimidating to me because they're far more successful than me, they're far more notable than me, they're whatever. And I have that twinge of maybe I don't belong here, and I immediately can reframe that as, this is the place to be. There's opportunity here. These are people I can learn from. These are people I can grow with. So don't you dare head for the exit. I need to lean into this opportunity and take advantage of what's been opened up to me here. So there's been a lot of those kind of just really quick reframing techniques. I wrote an article that was published in Fast Company magazine yesterday about reframing anxiety as excitement. That when you're nervous, nervousness and excitement are basically the same emotion. It's a heightened sort of physical stimulated state brought on by emotions. And if you can simply tell yourself, I'm not nervous, I'm excited. Nervousness is an anticipation of things going badly. Excitement is an anticipation of things going well. And so don't kill the anticipation, just flip the anticipation, and those butterflies become excitement, not fear or nerves. So there's a lot of little things like that that I learned along the way that have helped me. And I tell a story in chapter 10 about getting to the end of writing this book. And of course, I've been talking to a lot of people about it. And I got introduced to an entrepreneur by one of his clients, and we had a conversation, kind of the typical, tell me about yourself, what are you working on kind of thing. And I explained imposter syndrome. He said, I've never heard of that. Tell me what it is. And I explained what it is. I told him I'm writing this book. And he said, that's terrible. I don't know anybody who feels that way. Entrepreneurs are bold. They're brave. They're risk takers. Entrepreneurs aren't like that. I don't think anybody's going to buy that book. That's literally what he said. I don't think anyone will buy your book. And it was just that pointed. He's just one of those guys that just tells you what he thinks. And I'm sitting on a mountain of research and hundreds of interviews. I've got a book 80% written about this, and this guy says you're full of crap. And for a split second, I had that, oh no, what if he's right? What if I have bared my soul, I've exposed my vulnerabilities, I've told everybody that I'm insecure, and the whole entrepreneurial community is going to laugh at me? What if he's right? But it was just for a split second, because I had all of this information. I not only had this evidence, this information I'd studied, but I had the tools and techniques that I had been writing about. And I knew that I had done my due diligence on this. And so I was able to just very kindly say, well, I appreciate you being honest and not placating me. Let's wrap up this phone call. And I probably won't talk to that guy again, because he was kind of a jerk. But anyway, I was able to recognize that voice that said, he's right. You're going to fail. This isn't going to work. You've made a mistake. And immediately shut that down and say, that's just the imposter. That's just self-doubt. And it was spurred by an outside person, but not every person is worth listening to. So things like that, that I've been able to make that move a lot quicker, I guess is what I would say. Because previously I might have stewed about that for days and worried and wrangled, and I just, I got over that so quick. And I said, that's a great story. I'm going to write that in the book. So it's in chapter 10.
Awesome. I think, Dave, did you have another question on the call?
Yes, I was just writing it out. Hey, so reading your book, Kris, it's great. Thank you. For those who want to, continue to study a little bit more afterwards, what's your favorite resource that you used? What would you recommend?
Oh man, Carol Dweck's book Mindset is, I think, a must read for every entrepreneur, for anybody in leadership. I included that in the bibliography. I'm a big fan of Patrick Lencioni's work, especially his books like The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team and Getting Naked, where he talks about the importance of vulnerability and vulnerability-based trust. And then, for other resources, I would say, I talked quite a bit, or I wrote quite a bit in the book about the importance of being part of a community where vulnerability is the norm and it's okay. Having a peer group, having a coach, and being a mentor yourself. One of the key concepts that I didn't take the time to go into today is that you can learn while you're teaching, and you can mentor while you're being mentored. Those two things are not mutually exclusive. And much of my career has been defined by, here's the person I'm learning from, and here's the person I'm helping to learn something. And that's an ongoing journey for me, and I encourage everyone, because when you mentor someone else, you may think, well, I'm only on step 3 out of 25, but there's somebody that's trying to go from step 1 to step 2. And if you can help them, it will build that confidence that, hey, I may not be where I ultimately want to be, but I have some value. I have something to offer. And so I think there's tremendous value, not just in a give back situation, but value to yourself for taking the time to help somebody else along their journey, even while you're looking for help in the next hand up, the next outreached arm to help you get to where you're trying to go. Thanks for the question, Dave. Anybody else?
Awesome, well, maybe a big round of applause is due.
All
What do you
right.
think? Huh?
Thank you.
I have a giveaway to do virtually?
Yeah.
Okay, sweet.
So as I mentioned, Pinnacle Bank bought 25 of my books specifically to give away at this event for people here. So we want to make sure that the people online get a chance as well. So we're going to give 5 away to people online, and the rest of you will have to fight over the 20 that are here, because we may have more than 20 people in this room. I don't know. We might be right up the middle.
I think it'll be good.
We're pretty close.
Awesome.
So
I'm spinning it. Sorry, you guys can't see it, but I'll narrate. We gotta keep track. All right, Miss Mary Michael. Let me write that down.
Mary Michael Horowitz. Congratulations, Mary Michael.
Next one is Stephanie. Although Stephanie, please message me what your last name is, because I don't have that. Matt Erickson. There's many Matts on the call. I will say there's 4 Matts. It made it very hard for me.
I know a lot of Matts. There was literally an email where I introduced one Matt to 2 other Matts in an email thread, and it was very confusing.
That's so funny. It also seems to keep going the same way. Okay, Mary Michael can't win again. Sorry, Mary.
You don't get 2.
Gonna remove the names.
I know, it needs to spin a little differently. Larry Powell. Honestly, I'm not gonna lie, this software seems like it's really favoring one side of this circle. Well, that's how it goes.
Larry gets a copy. Larry is actually mentioned in the book.
The last one is Scott Revo. Okay, let me write this down.
Zap. Scott Revo actually works for Dexterity now and already has a copy of the book, so you might want to spin again. We were cracking up that this was going to happen.
Thank you for letting me know. I was ready to give it to Scott. Okay, we'll have to spin it again. Not Larry. Yeah, this is a very unfair spinning technology.
It is apparently completely random.
Okay, we're going to give it to Robbie McDonald because he was right next to it.
There you go.
Awesome. I'm going to stop sharing. Remember, folks in the audience, just mask up, grab more food, and you're welcome to stay and network.
I'm going to hang around. We'll have some books for you guys if you want one. And if you have any other questions, I'll be here. And those of you online, thanks so much for joining. Feel free to reach out to me online. I'm easy to find as long as you know my name starts with a K, Kris Kelso with a K. And overcomingtheimposter.com is the name of the website where you can find more info on the book. Thanks a lot.